Time to talk about the R6. Alright guys, I've had this camera for 2 months now, and I wanted to talk about if my opinion on this camera has changed since my last review. If you haven't seen my last review, just click, what side is it on? I don't know. So do I like it? Do I hate it? Or am I somewhere in the middle? And honestly, I still love the camera, guys. It's an amazing camera. It's phenomenal. Now, with that being said, I do have a couple things I want to point out, but we'll get into that shortly. Now, let me just start off by saying this camera takes phenomenal photos. Now, I'm not a crazy photographer or anything, but I do take the odd photo here and there. And from what I've seen, the photos this camera takes is absolutely amazing. I can't see a difference between the R6 and the R in the photo capability department. Now, I'm sure if you zoomed into like 10,000%, then you'll probably see that difference, but honestly, it's great with photos. Don't let the 20 megapixels stop you from getting this camera. If you're a photographer, if you're a wedding photographer, if you're any photographer, I totally recommend this camera. One of the things that I'm really liking on the R6 is the toggle, the little joystick instead of that touch bar that the EOS R had. I never use that touch bar. The toggle is so much better. I mentioned in my initial review that I was really bummed that it didn't have an all-eye codec, but honestly, with the 10-bit, the IPB looks incredible. You really don't need all-eye. If anything, it's saving you a bunch of space. With that being said, I don't think they should have taken all-eye out. I think they should have left it in for the people that want to use all-eye. But if you're on the fence because this camera doesn't have all-eye, don't let that stop you from getting this camera. The IPB with the 10-bit looks incredible. And honestly, if you were to put them side by side, you probably wouldn't even tell the difference. Canon should be sponsoring me for selling their cameras. In all honesty, guys, I'm really loving this camera. I'm not just trying to sell the R6. I'm not paid or sponsored or anything by Canon. Although I do pay myself and sponsor myself and feed myself. And my name's Canon, so in some cases, maybe I am sponsored by Canon. If you're new to my channel, this is something you're gonna have to get used to. I make fun of my name and how I use a Canon camera all the time. And anyways, back to the review. All right, so be warned, this camera isn't all great. Let's talk about some of the negatives. I'm not sure if this is just my camera, which I don't think it is. I think I've heard other people talk about this as well. I can't seem to turn the IBIS off when my lens is attached, specifically my image stabilized lens. I can, however, turn the stabilization off on my lens and the IBIS will turn off that way, but I don't get to keep the lens stabilization. Not that that's a big deal, but I thought I'd bring it up because it is kind of a weird situation with this camera. I feel like you should be able just to turn the IBIS off if need be. Now, I know some cameras that have IBIS don't allow you to turn the IBIS off at all, but this camera does let you turn the IBIS on and off, so I would think let us turn it on and off with an image stabilized lens. Anyways, on to the next bit. Okay, if you plan on shooting 4K with this camera, be prepared to make proxies. I cannot edit this footage whatsoever unless I make proxies. Maybe if you have a beast of a computer, then it won't be as bad. Even then, I think it's the H.265 codec that makes it really hard for something like Premiere to play back smoothly. So be prepared to make proxies. If that's a deal breaker for you, if you need a fast turnaround, then maybe shoot 1080p with this camera or go with another 4K camera option. That sounded very official. Now, I haven't had this camera overheat on me yet, but overheating could be an issue. Oh, geez. I'm kidding. It's just sandalwood powder. I'm gonna take this out before I hotbox the office. In all seriousness, this camera does have the potential to overheat. Now, I've only ever had one overheat warning, and that was because I was shooting a really long form content. But even then, I still didn't get to overheat. I just turned the camera off for a little bit and charged the battery for a minute and then put it back in, finished the shoot that I was doing, and that was fine. So it wasn't an inconvenience. You know, that could be a potential inconvenience for some of you, so keep it in mind, but to be completely honest, I think the whole overheating thing was blown way out of proportion. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up was I had this camera freeze on me one time. I was taking photos of my wife at the beach, and I was snapping photos, and then the screen just kind of froze, and I couldn't do anything. I tried switching it on and off and tried changing the settings, nothing. The camera was just frozen. So I actually had to take the battery out and then put it back in, and it worked fine after that. I've only had that happen to me once, but hopefully they make like a firmware update for something like that. I've heard a couple other people talk about that. It hasn't been a really big issue for me. It's happened to me once and it was only in photo mode, wasn't in video mode. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see if you guys have the R6, if you've ever experienced the camera freezing up on you. Comment down below if it ever has. Bringing it back to some of the positives, this camera works great with my EF glass. I'm using the EF 16 to 35 right now, and the autofocus works really well. Never had any autofocus problems with these EF lenses. One thing I was really happy to see is the 1080p in this camera looks phenomenal with that 10-bit, as well as the 4K. The 4K looks incredible as well because it's downscaled from 5K. And the 10-bit just is awesome. It's amazing to color grade with, and it looks really, really good. One thing I'm really loving about the R6 over my previous R is the low light performance. You don't get a bunch of noise and grain in the shadows like you did on the EOS R. I remember that R being really bad at that. It was really bad at low light. So I'm really happy that this camera is really good in low light. I've cranked the ISO on this thing super high. I actually did a low light test. You can check it out here. And I'll probably do a part 2 to that. I want to take it in some more low light scenarios and really just crank that ISO up really high. I'd be curious to see how the low light performance on the R6 stacks up against the A7S III. Obviously the Sony will probably have the edge. Actually, I don't doubt it for a minute. The Sonys are just known for their low light performance. But with that being said, the R6 has really surprised me. So don't sleep on it, guys. The low light performance on the R6 is definitely a beast. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap up my 2-month review on this camera. Overall, still loving this camera. Now, there are a couple things that Canon could possibly fix in a firmware update, but all in all, great camera, and I'm still really happy that I got it. All right, guys, if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. It helps me out tremendously. And if you want to see more R6 content, consider subscribing. And yeah, that's about it, guys. I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.
Like